It's always nice to see a beautiful native landscape, and right now we're going to be talking about protecting those native landscapes. I'm joined by Jessica Wilson from the City of Austin Watershed Protection Department, and we're going to be talking about those pesky invasive plants that are taking over in places where we should have native flora. So welcome, great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Now, a lot of people have heard the term invasive plants, and sometimes they think, well, gosh, that's kind of what I want. I want an invasive plant that's going to, take over, and I won't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
What are we talking about exactly when we talk about invasives?
So when we talk about invasives, we're talking about plants that are exotic, so non-native, and ones that cause harm, and that could be ecological harm or economic harm.
Okay. Pretty easy definition.
Exactly.
When we talk about ecological harm, I think that's a paramount concern in terms of your work in protecting the watersheds and the creek beds of Central Texas. What are we talking about here? Are they actually taking over completely?
So these are areas, we see areas throughout Austin where you have monocultures of plants, and so that means where that's the only plant that you see. So you could go to a nature preserve where people expect to see a showcase of native Texas beauty, and instead you run into just a wall of ligustrum.
So, in other words, you're visiting a little corner of Japan or China.
Exactly.
Right.
It's very confusing for people who maybe are just getting to know their plants.
Right. Well, our purpose here is really to provide people with good alternatives to a lot of these invasives, and I think what we can do is run through some of the plants that are great alternatives and the plants that we're suggesting they replace. And as we do that, we can talk about why some of these plants are so pesky. And let's start off by talking about one of the worst of the invasives, and these are the different members of the privet or ligustrum family.
Yeah, these are plants that have a really bad name in Austin. If you run into a master naturalist or gardeners, they'll immediately kind of cringe at the term. So we aren't anti-ligustrum and privets. They still are good plants in their place, but in somebody's personal home, it's a plant that you can easily replace with something that's native and will still serve the same function, whether that's providing a good screen for you. That's normally what people want, is something that'll just block the neighbor or the street.
Right. Well, these are the ligustrums are big shrubs. And what are some good alternatives? I know that cherry laurel is one that's popular.
Cherry laurel is a beautiful plant to replace it. It's an evergreen. If you crush the leaves, you get a slight cherry scent, so that's always fun to show kids when they're beginning to learn their plants. And it's pretty well behaved, so it'll stay in your yard where you want it to, versus the ligustrum produces thousands of berries that then can easily jump over into the preserves.
Right, and of course the birds are the conveyors of the berries. They eat the berries and then spread them around, which is true for a lot of the plants we're going to be talking about. And of course, the ligustrum, like so many of the plants that we're going to be highlighting as invasives, were like the #1 sellers in their day in the nurseries, right?
Yeah, a lot of these plants people have in their yards because they have been sold by nurseries and they do well. The trick is we're trying to find things that do well in your garden, but not too well, where then they displace natives. And so that's why we try to really promote a lot of our native plants that are hardy.
Okay. Well, a few years ago, everybody in Central Texas was talking about Chinese pistache and what a great plant it was. And now we're adding it to the invasive list?
We are. We're starting to notice that popping up a lot in East Austin and places that have some of the deeper soils, and maybe that plant wasn't intended to be there.
Okay.
So a lot of times people were planting that for some of the seasonal to fall color. And so a flame leaf sumac or a red oak are really good alternatives where you still get that aesthetic benefit.
And don't forget big tooth maples, one of my all-time favorite plants for fall color in Central Texas, and a little slower growing than the pistache, but a beautiful plant.
But well worth the wait.
Absolutely. It's a great plant. Now, we did reference the privets, and some of those are the big wax leaf kind, but then you also get the little leaf kind of Asian privets as well. And there's some good alternatives for that finer texture. And one of those you've brought along with you, and that's wax myrtle.
Yeah, the leaves look very similar to somebody who maybe isn't as familiar with plants. Wonderful evergreen shrub. It likes shade, a little bit more moisture. So it'll do well in areas where that small leaf privet was, or even an andina. It's great to replace those.
Well, some of the invaders are small trees, like the vitex, and this is one that has a lovely bloom, and again, tough as nails in a lot of ways. In fact, it used to be included in some of the native books, but with the notation that it escaped cultivation, right?
Yeah, it used to mislead a lot of people too because it would be sold as a Texas lilac.
Right.
But one that I recommend for that is a Mexican buckeye.
Right, and you've brought a buckeye that's in bloom. We're in that magic window
We
of
were
spring,
lucky. Yeah.
where we get the buckeye blooms, and they are a really magnificent plant, I think.
They are. They're some of the first blooms that you notice. So you're coming and waking up from winter where you had this kind of just gray, dull landscape, and then these vivid pink blossoms burst forward. So it's a really great one.
Yeah.
It looks exotic, but it is native to the hill country.
Right, and it does have an exotic-looking flower, but it's tough as nails, native plant, often mistaken for redbud when you're looking at it from a distance.
It is. And redbud's another beautiful native to include in your landscape.
Right. Well, one of the worst of the invaders is a plant, and I'm guilty. 20 or 30 years ago, I recommended people planting Nandinas just because it is so durable and tough. But nowadays, you go into almost anywhere in a nature preserve or a park in Austin, there it is.
Yeah, Nandina is another one that has these red berries that then birds will eat, and so that helps them fly into all of these preserves. So a nice alternative for that, if you really love that color, is to get a Yopon holly instead. So you'll still get those beautiful red berries and a nice evergreen shrub.
Right.
You do want to be aware and set some time aside to dig that Nandina out. So the easiest thing is to not plant an invasive in your garden in the first place.
Yes, much easier than digging out Nandina, I promise
Right.
you. And the Yopon is a good alternative, but if you're looking for a shrub in a sunny area, you've also brought like Texas sage is a plant that people can consider as something that gets
That's
to a
right.
similar scale.
Yes, it won't have the same colors as the Nandina does, but you can keep it to the same shape
Sure.
and provide that kind of shrub form.
And absolutely stunning when it is in bloom, of course. Now, the vines, this is where a lot of people do think of invasives because vines are so hard to control. And there are a lot of invasive vines. We can think of Japanese honeysuckle, for example, or an exotic species called cat claw vine that I'm dealing with in my own garden. I find impossible, no matter how much I work on it, impossible to weed out.
Catclaw vine's one that people weren't that familiar with as an invasive plant, but once you learn to identify it, then you see it lots of places, and where
Yeah.
it is, it'll just form a blanket that suppresses new native plants from growing up.
It'll suppress anything.
Right.
Blanket is a good word for the habit of this particular
Yeah.
plant. It just engulfs other plants.
It does. It's a good description.
And so it's really pernicious in a lot of different ways. But if you are interested in a vine, there's always the native cross vine, which is lovely.
Yeah, the crossvine has a very similar flower to the catclaw vine as well. Different color, but the same tubular flower, and it's an evergreen. It is one of the more aggressive vines, so it's good if you do want something that's completely covering a fence.
Right.
Or if you want something that's a little bit more subdued, then I recommend the coral honeysuckle, which hummingbirds flock to.
Right. Yeah. It's not quite the Godzilla of vines, but
Right.
it really is well behaved and lovely. And the crossvine is tough as nails too, which is a good
Yeah.
thing, and comes in a couple of different colors. There's a native one, which is kind of yellow and kind of a muted brownish color almost.
Exactly.
And then the improved tangerine beauty form, which has a beautiful kind of pinky red color to it.
Right, because you're including natives in your garden doesn't mean that it has to be boring. It'll really bring a lot of drama and color in.
Well, we see the invasives in all different places. You also, one of the worst is elephant ears, and we have just enough time to talk about one or two alternatives there. I would think pickerel rush would be a fantastic one for if you have wet conditions. Don't plant the elephant ears, plant pickerel rush.
That's one of my favorite things to see in people's ponds because in addition to getting the great foliage, you also have these really striking purple blossoms. that will come up. So you get more than you would with the elephant ear,
Right.
but it's native and really providing good habitat for your aquatic plant
Right,
animals.
and then a lot of butterflies and other things enjoy the pickerel rush as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, it's been a real pleasure. Good luck to you in what is going to be a daunting task of getting control of these invasives, but we appreciate your efforts.
Yeah. Thank you for getting people started at home.
All right, very good. Thanks, Jessica. And if you want to follow us online, please do so on Facebook. And coming up next, it's our friend Daphne.